want to thank everyone for coming. Dr. Tarpley is going to talk about the history of the Hamilton School, American School of Economics. I'm going to tell you what we can do with that. Where can we go with that? It's not just history, it's about where we can go forward with this system. So here's the title of my presentation, The 21st Century Infrastructure Through the Hamilton American School of Economics. Three core principles. Protect domestic industry through tariffs to foster a full-set economy. What is a full-set economy? That's an economy that can make everything you need in a nation. If you need to build reactor plants, if you need to build railroads, if you need to build ships, if you need to biomedical research, you can do it all in country. You don't have to go out into another country and say, hey, we need coal, we need aluminum, we need magnesium to build things. We can do it all here. And the way to foster that environment is to have a tariff on imports. We're saying here at the Tax Wall Street Party, 15%. What's going on now? You have a free trade where you're talking about somewhere between 0 to 3% tariff right now. That's nothing. All of our manufacturing has gone. It has left. The only way to bring back that environment is to protect the high-wage American worker through the tariff. Donald Trump talks about lowering wages and increasing tariffs. That's someone who has no command of a tariff trade system. The point of the tariff is to protect the high-wage worker. It's not so you can then lower it even more. If you want to compete against slave labor, you will become slave labor. One point I'm going to really highlight today here is the government investments in infrastructure creating targeted internal improvements to facilitate commerce and fuel the private enterprise. We don't hate private enterprise. We're not here saying the government needs to do everything. But we need to inflame that. We need to get that going. So this is what we want to do. We're going to have essentially a Bank of the United States turn the Federal Reserve, turn its power into the United States away from Wall Street. Currently, it's all going to Wall Street. $27 trillion was available to Wall Street during the financial crisis in 2009. We want to take that money, turn it back to the American people. So we have a glut of projects to do, and I'm going to highlight one of them later on. And there's an absolute need for this. And like I mentioned, creation of that national bank to issue credit. It's not deficit spending. It's not printing money out of nowhere. It's credit. We're going to issue credit to local, state, municipalities. They're going to come to the Fed and say, hey, we have this project. We want to build a Mag Lev. We want to build a nuclear reactor. We're going to research how to cure cancer. We're going to go to the Federal Reserve. We're going to ask for 0% interest, long-term maturity. So this is going to be 100 years. We're going to pay this back over a 100-year period. It's the 21st century. Why doesn't it feel like it? I mean, we walk around. Look around to you. We're behind in everything. We talked about this yesterday on the panel. Part one was that panel yesterday. Republicans are blocking the political process. It's not based on any kind of theory or anything. They just don't want to agree with these things because they don't want to agree. Modern infrastructure projects seen as too expensive or a bridge to nowhere. This is crazy. You would never have California if you took this mentality. You wouldn't have all these states in the West. You would have no development in the Midwest, West. 0%, zero spending. U.S. is only spending $8 billion on high-speed rail. China is killing us, $50 billion. We need to go to the Fed, and we need to say we need to go 10 times this amount, even more. We talk about $5 trillion immediately. Where is transportation needed? Now, we talked about the speed of the U.S. high-speed rail sector, and I gave it to you in a text form. This is more of a visual form. So what you see here is all this gray area is 79 mile per hour passenger rail. That's essentially turn of the century. They were doing this in the late 1800s, early 1900s. 1934, Chicago to Salt Lake City. The Pioneer Zephyr, first diesel passenger train, set the world record between these two cities. It was averaging 110 miles per hour. We're below this now, 79 miles per hour. This is insane. Here you have some, this is the Northeast Corridor. This is our closest thing to high-speed rail. We have California. This is going to be great. California high-speed rail, 200 miles per hour, first time in the United States. We need to make this happen faster. They're building it now. We need to make it go quicker in more places. You see all this glut, all this, too slow. Potential corridors. Now I want to just highlight here in this map, I was trying to find a good map for this, but Maglev today is currently up to about 375 miles per hour. This is based on 220 miles per hour. And basically what you see, we've turned almost a mass transit system into the United States. It's not just New York. It's not just a map of rail lines in New York. We have connected the entire country through Maglev systems. And like I said, this measurement gives you a time frame of how long it would take to get from these areas, but it's based on 220. We're at 375 currently. Now the question is, do we go with Maglev or do we go with high-speed rail? High-speed rail is great. We like this. But we want to, this is the 20th century technology. We're in the 21st century now. We need to do better than that. High-speed rail represents the best of the 20th century. TGV, 350 miles per hour. That's the latest test of TGV technology in France. It's high-speed rail. It's at almost full maturity. A rail-on-rail system can only go so fast. As you increase speeds, maintenance increases on those rails. You have to do more maintenance on these systems. They start to reach a point of where the cost isn't right. Maglev, 375 miles per hour currently. It's in the early stages of development, or actually it's past development. It's an implementation. You have one high-speed rail Maglev line in China and one coming in Japan, hopefully one in the US. We're going to talk about that later. Like I said, extensive maintenance at high speeds on high-speed rail. Essentially the rail will wear out faster. The faster you go, the faster the friction is, the increase in friction, the faster it wears out. Track wear. You also have to build an expensive catenary system. That's where you transmit the energy to the trains through the wires. Those wires have to be kept at a certain tension. If they aren't, there's a bouncing factor, and then the train will not get the connectivity that it needs to continue at these high speeds. So you have to wait. You have to make sure that there's a weighted system that keeps that tension through all courses of weather. So if it gets warmer, obviously it's going to stretch. If it gets colder, the line is going to shrink. So you have to make sure that that doesn't get affected. Now, someone brought this to my attention just last week, and they said, what do you think of Maglev compared to Hyperloop? And my issue with Hyperloop is there is no, I know this is being built, there is no implementation of this yet. It's essentially something we'll have to wait for. We can't build this right now. If we want to invest in this and we want to say, hey, maybe we could go somewhere with this, sure, absolutely, we'll put money towards that. But we need something.
Explain the difference a little?
Yeah, Hyperloop is essentially a vacuum tube. And what it does is it uses fans and air pressure to send a train or a car through the tube. Now, I'm going to go through that in a little bit. Maglev, you can do open air. Now, to reach full potential, let me just go back real quick. Maglev, one of the great things about Maglev, you can repurpose it for freight. It's not just passenger rail that we're talking about. You also want to be able to move freight. We want to enable commerce faster, better, safer. You can make freight, you can load freight on Maglev and send it down the line. Hyperloop, you can't do this. Maglev, in a vacuum tube, currently they believe we can reach 1,800 miles per hour. Hyperloop is capped at 700 miles per hour. So now, going back to what we were talking about, what is Hyperloop? It's a tube. You have to maintain the vacuum pressure. Now, if you do that, you can at some point reach 700 miles per hour, in theory. We haven't actually seen this in practice yet. Maglev, you can do 375 miles per hour without the vacuum tube. If you do, at some level advance to that point, we're hoping to get to 1,800 miles per hour. But we want to get this built now. We need this now. This would be what the US would be getting. This is the Chinese Shanghai Maglev. This caps out at about 260 miles per hour. This is kind of Maglev 1.1. Here's 2.0. This is 375 miles per hour. This is the Japanese Maglev. This is what we want to bring to the Northeast and the entire United States. Another important part about Maglev, you can switch. You can switch tracks. There's an ability to do this. Hyperloop, you have to maintain this pressure. It hasn't been perfected of a switch. There are currently switches active on the Shanghai Maglev where you can actually switch in and out trains. It maintains the feel of conventional rail. If you look at this, it doesn't look too much different than what you're riding on. It's not something where it needs a unique transit hub, a unique facility. It can interact with current rail technology. One big thing that kind of gets glossed over. Now, of course, we want to have all these high-speed things connecting different cities, but in short-term areas, in metro systems, commuter rail operations, you can implement Maglev. Instead of having all this wear and tear on the rails, all this need for all the steel for these things, you can create Maglev where you have no friction. It's frictionless. It's just floating on magnets. It's floating on, the magnet raises the train up, There's no steel-on-steel contact. So you don't have the intensive maintenance that you have to do on conventional rail. And speeds we're highlighting, I mentioned before, Chinese 268 miles per hour, Japan 373 miles per hour. Proposals in the United States. Currently, the closest thing we have here is Washington to Baltimore Maglev. The Japanese are dying to build this. They are offering $5 billion if you build this now. They will offer you the technology essentially for free. They want you to build this. Total cost of the project, $12 billion. Travel time between Washington and Baltimore, 15 minutes. Currently on the Acela, 50 minutes. Now, we want this to go further. Obviously, Maglev's advantage is the longer you go, the longer you can sustain the higher speeds. That's when you really, really can see the advantage. But even at a short distance here, you're going to see 15 minutes as compared to 50 minutes. We want a New York extension added onto this. Travel time between New York and Washington would be 1 hour. Current Acela is 2 hours and 30 minutes. Cost of that project, $100 billion. We need to go to the Fed. We need to say, we need $100 billion right now. We want to build this. We want to leapfrog China. We want to leapfrog Japan. We can be better than that. We don't need to be stuck in the high-speed rail. We can go further than them, leapfrog what they're spending money on. This I thought would be an interesting comparison here. Travel times, Montreal to New York. This is the current Adirondack service. At some point, Amtrak, I mean, it's just not fair to compare. 381 miles. Travel time on Amtrak, 10 hours, 30 minutes. Airlines, 1 hour and 20 minutes. Maglev would be just over 1 hour. Boston to Washington on the Acela Express, the fastest train we currently have right now. That's 450 mile an hour, that's correct, I'm sorry. 450 mile corridor, 2 hours and 30 minutes. Excuse me, that's incorrect. This is based on New York to Washington. It's about 7 hours on Amtrak from Washington to Boston. Airlines, you're talking about 1 hour and 25 minutes. And Maglev, you're looking at 1 hour and 13 minutes. Washington to Chicago, 764 miles. Travel time on Amtrak, like I said, this isn't even fair, 17 hours. It's really comparable to the airlines. Airline, 2 hours and 5 minutes. Maglev, 2 hours, 24 minutes. And this is at current technology state. This can still go, this can get much better. This is currently at 375 miles per hour. Chicago to San Francisco, 2,400 miles, give or take. Airline, 4 hours. Maglev, 6 hours. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting pretty close. Seattle, Los Angeles, 2 hours, 34 minutes. Maglev, 3 hours, 41 minutes. Maybe an important corridor to highlight here. New York to Miami. This is across the East Coast. Atlantic corridor. 3 hours, 10 minutes by airline. Maglev currently would be 3 hours and 43 minutes, so we're getting really, really close to that, and the technology is still advancing. Just to show you this exists, you want to talk about Hyperloop. We don't really have an example of this. Maglev exists. This would be your Maglev. New York, Washington, 1 hour.
What is the longest distance a Maglev now does?
Currently, the Shanghai Maglev is, it's not very far currently. It's only about 50 miles, but you can stretch the technology as much as you can come up with. It has no limitations based on distance.
For like flat track like that, what's the cost per mile?
The guideways are expensive, but so is a guideway for high-speed rail. They're comparable to that. So the difference isn't so much there. There wouldn't be a great difference going from high-speed rail on a guided corridor to Maglev on a guided corridor. But now you're going to have no maintenance, essentially. I mean, you're going to have some maintenance, but you're not going to have the steel on steel constantly changing the track, constantly maintaining the catenary system. So you're not going to have all those things that come with conventional rail. Also, Maglev can go on increased gradient. It can go 10% increase, whereas high-speed rail is about 3 or 4%. The track, gradient going uphill, downhill. So Maglev can do 10%.
Just a further observation, like last night, I did a panel on money and its falsity yesterday, I was a speaker. And last night, there was some discussion, or I was talking anyway, about the swift theft of the U.S. dollar reserves of the Bangladesh Central Bank. And the SWIFT system was used to steal their foreign currency reserves. And the story got much deeper here. I was just talking about this because the Bangladesh central $80 billion central bank currency reserves were actually the New York Fed. So it was the New York Fed that got hacked. $80 billion disappeared. And they just made up another $80 billion to make good this massive computerized debt. So you said that the price tag on this is $100 billion. And it also sounds like that to run a train like that, you basically have to rebuild part of the power grid or anything.
Yeah, I mean, an increase in the power grid will be something we would need to spend money on as well. You know, coming from
but they literally made up $80 billion to make good on this debt for an ally, for a foreign ally under the Basel III rules. And then they concealed the fact as long as they could.
Right, and the fact that, you know, you're talking about, during the 2009 bailout, you're talking about $27 trillion. Nobody seems to really have a problem with that. That's not a bridge too far. That wasn't too much money. That wasn't, we don't have any way to pay for this bailout to Wall Street or the banks. But when you talk about infrastructure, you're talking about a lot smaller number compared to 27 trillion. I mean, it's a big number, but it's way smaller than 27 trillion. Why do people have that same reaction? Why is it such like, no way, this is impossible? This isn't scientific, it's not science fiction anymore. It's science reality, it's science fact. We can have these things. There's no reason not to. If you look to the Far East, they're building it. They're going to do it. They're going to build the Japanese line, that one I showed you the last one, the video. That's going to be built. They're going to build a line to Tokyo. And we need to do this in the Northeast and everywhere, really. I mean, we have all these corridors. We have California corridor, we have the Texas T-bone, we have the Midwest, we have Florida, and then we can interconnect all these regions. And it doesn't just end there. I mean, how about, we found one positive from Sarah Palin. She said, she was asked about, well, how would she deal domestic policy with Russia? Well, some parts of Alaska, I can see Russia. And she's right. We could build a maglev that goes across, up into Alaska, across into Russia. So it doesn't have to be just continental. It could be intercontinental. Yeah. As the speed increases, as the technology improves, as it's more refined, you can get to that point. But the point is, we can get 375 miles per hour right now. And that destroys everything we have here. I mean, there's nothing close to that. And it's better than China. If you want to compete with China, how about just going better than them? We don't need to compete. We can go past them. And the Fed is the way to do it. We need to say, hey, you guys need to issue that Fed to us. We need to build these things. The whole place is falling apart. We're stuck in I showed you I don't know if you saw it, Clark, but I had a map showing the current rail system. Maybe if I can go back to that quickly. Yeah, right here. So here, look. All this gray area is the passenger rail system in the United States that runs at 79 miles per hour, max. That's not average, that's max. So, I mean, if you think, this stuff needs to happen. It's not like we have a great system here that's okay to handle as it is. This stuff needs immediate improvement right now. So the hope of all this talk is not just to say, hey, watch, this is a Smithsonian or something, or at a museum. We want people to go and take this and say, hey, look, we don't just say, oh, we want infrastructure. We want specific programs. We want the New York to Washington Maglev. We want the Maglev up the East Coast. We want the Maglev from New York to Chicago. And we can go with these demands. And then they say, oh, well, how are we going to pay for it? We're going to go to the Federal Reserve. And we're going to say, no more Wall Street. You're going to help us out. And we're going to put people back to work. Because this is all jobs. This is all jobs. High-paying, union-level jobs right here. And this is just the rail infrastructure. I can give you, the power grid's good, the power grid's awful. And we can go through all this stuff. Airports, you think they're nice? I'm sure some people may have flown out of LaGuardia. It's an absolute nightmare. There's tons of sectors that are way behind, and we have a lot of people out of work, and we need to match that up. And all we need is to get the capital, the credit to do that. And the way to get that credit, it's just sitting there, is at the Federal Reserve. And that's really the point of it. And we want to get people active and to make Maglev and all kinds of things a reality.
Any question? Yeah, just a thought on this. What would you say would be the improvement in the situation to have people being able to travel faster? I know there's an answer to this, but I haven't been able to figure out what it is. I would like to go to Washington in an hour.
Right.
Just saving people time and. What are the other improvements in this increased speed between travel?
Okay, sure, yeah.
Is it freight that you're looking for, or?
I mean, it's both, really. I mean, the ability to have more people get to an area faster and amplify their economic impact in that area is just that alone. That's really what we're talking about, is being able to go from New York to Washington, commit some kind of, not commit, but engage in a economic activity, be able to engage in economic activity that can amplify production of people. And the fact that I can move now freight faster. So if I can manufacture something, I can connect it to the supply and demand faster. And that's really the advantage of connecting people quicker. Just think, think of why do we have the Acela Express? Why do we do that? So we can get people that from business, from downtown to downtown fast to commit to do their business, to go and do what they need to do, to improve the output, to improve their output, make it quicker.
And perhaps another way to say this is you're increasing the productivity of labor. That would be the economic approach to saying, look, you have a certain productivity of labor. The more infrastructure you build of this type and other types, the higher the productivity of labor is going to be. And the U.S. productivity of labor was rising by about 2 to 3% a year into the 1970s. And then somehow it got stuck, and then they began to cook the books because it was so embarrassing that the productivity of labor was not growing. And one of the reasons is that the infrastructure had come to a screeching halt and was actually going backwards.
So technology in general.
But productivity of labor, that's your all-inclusive measure.
Advances
of
in
the
technology always create
higher productivity of labor. Right.
Yeah, and also
one of the things we did 40 years ago is we took the Long Island Railroad and we compared the timetable of today with the time for then, today I'm sure, and the timetable of 1850. And the passenger service on the Long Island Railroad had gone backwards.
Yeah, I mean that was the point of that Pioneer Zephyr talk I had, where from Chicago to Salt Lake City, that was achieved in 10 hours and about 50 minutes. If you look at the schedule at Amtrak, now there's obviously stops involved, but you're looking at 15 hours currently today. And that was the Pioneer Zephyr was 1934. So we're going backwards. And just back to your point, with freight, this isn't just the speeds of the passenger trains, the freight trains are at this level. So they're using the same tracks essentially in most of these areas. And they're trying to find ways to move shipping containers, double stack containers. They're trying to increase the ability to move this freight faster. So why not if we can do it quicker, if we can just physically do it quicker? We can put it on and the train can go X miles per hour, 100, 200, and ship the freight faster. And this way, if I make a car, I can get more of them out quicker.
So productivity of labor, like dollars per hour, how do you measure that?
Yeah, that's what you can do with dollars per hour, right? But you're mainly concerned with, is it rising or falling? And in the US, it was stationary, and then it might have been falling, and then, like so many data series, it was just cooked. There's the question of the average weekly earnings, right? You're dealing with a situation where the overall standard of living has gone down by almost 2/3, right? 65%, from about 1970. Some people would say it began falling in 67, some would say 73, 74. The official statistics, I think, 73, 74. And then it starts to fall. And then that becomes a political liability. And the guy who did this was the economic advisor of Bush the Elder. And his name is escaping me. But he came out and said, hey, we can get white wine at the deli, and we can get brie, and therefore we need to show this looking much better. He said, you're forgetting about the quality of what we're receiving. So this was, what it means is that data series has become useless. The other thing is they want to fix and cook the data series because there may be cost of living allowances that are part of this, and they want to make sure that none of that gets paid.
So standard of living follows productivity of labor? I mean, do they correlate?
Oh yeah. I mean, with elastic bands sometimes. But we have falling. I think in reality we obviously have falling productivity of labor. And I couldn't get over that stuff you put together about how all these Republican governors have just wantonly rejected these tremendously beneficial plans. Part of it is they don't want government to be seen as solving problems. That's one of their points, right? It's a hysterical anti-government position. They want to please the Koch brothers. And then there's always this thing of, if I as a governor can operate for another year or two, essentially, you know, spending this money, not building the tunnels, but spending the money so I don't have to raise taxes, then maybe I can get to be president, right? They're always thinking of that too. That was Christie's story. So it's horrible. I mean, it's a national albatross around your neck.
Actually, yesterday, Harry Casson, who was one of the panelists, came and left. Unfortunately, he could have told you more about this maybe. But this is how, arguably, the Roman Empire fell. The Emperor Claudius drained the marshes around Rome and made them productive. But the main thing is it suppressed malaria. And by about the 4th century, they were starting to, the canals silted up, and it was starting to get soggy, and the mosquitoes were back. And there was an economic choice made. You know, do you pay the debts? Do you pay the usurers? You know, who were lending, the tax farmers who were lending money to the state, or do you do the work again and rehabilitate it? Well, of course, they paid the debt because they had complete control of the establishment at that time, and everybody got malaria, and you had an implosion, you know, a generation later for other reasons, but mainly just everyone was sick. There was a big problem. One other thing, I think did you give the CSX presentation in Florida earlier?
Yeah, that was the
I missed it.
Yeah. And it's important to know that CSX is headquartered in Jacksonville, so.
Okay.
There we go, here.
So, yeah, so they've got a lot of juice in Florida.
Yeah, that's the area.
Manipulate this. I saw that. I've been kind of underemployed as an adult professional for a long time, but I was working at Wireless Generation, and it didn't dawn on any of us at the time. We were making kind of tablet-based learning for children, remedial education, and instead of this one teacher in a classroom of 20 kids, there'd be one young person, recent graduate, with a tablet and a room full of tablets for 40 kids. And you know, Rupert Murdoch, News Corporation, bought Wireless Generation. It's now amplified. Joel Klein, his lawyer, who defended him in a spying scandal, was running it. But it dawned on us at the end, when they were laying people off, that the biggest single budget line that states have for discretionary spending or for statutory spending is for education, public education. And it's a mandate. And they basically created a company to extract as much money as possible from the public budget. And it seems to me that your CSX people are doing exactly the same thing. They don't want to improve things. They want a direct subsidy like GE gets on their taxes, where they're actually taking money out of the public sector and doing nothing.
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
basically just a cash cow.
Yeah, we talked about this after the panel, but CSX, I mean, a lot of these railroads are doing this to some level. CSX is one of the worst. They don't put any money into their infrastructure, essentially. I mean, very little compared to what they're taking out. And what they do is they don't really, all they really care about is, can I get a double-stack train from Baltimore or Charleston and get it over to the West Coast as fast as possible with as many cars as possible. That's double-stack trains, oil trains. They don't really care what goes on short line anymore. That's, the profit margin's not big enough there. You know, to operate in a small town in rural Alabama, you know, to a manufacturing area or some plant there, they really don't care so much about that. They want to get as many, you know, 100-car train, double-stack containers, whoop, right across the country. And now that the oil boom's kind of calm, they're not really ripping profits on this as much. But oil trains, you know, we talked about them using inferior oil tankers to move this stuff. Because they don't have the infrastructure for the proper types of trains, there's a danger here. And this just happened in Washington. There was a derailment, CSX derailment. And people were saying,
Just north of Capitol Hill.
yeah, right at Rhode Island Avenue, if anyone has an idea about Washington. Right under the Rhode Island Avenue metro station. And people were saying, they were taking photographs and they said, what's in these containers? And they took a look and they said, this stuff, if you have a spill, you're supposed to evacuate a mile, 5 miles, some of them, radius. And this is just going through Washington, D.C. every day, and no one really cares. And like I said, the cars are known to be inferior that they're using because there isn't an investment in the infrastructure, in the rolling stock. And you know, this is a big problem. I mean, we wrote a brief. We did a big brief about all these. They happen in small town America, rural Canada. Nobody seems to care. But what happens when it happens in a major city? You know, is this a sign of things to come? You know, if the infrastructure continues to degrade, we're at D+ 2013. It's even worse now. You know, where's the point of failure could be really dangerous, and we don't need to have these things. We don't need to prove a point to allow these things to happen. We need to just change it, make it better. Sorry, hit that.
People have to expand their idea of like the Mag Lev, for instance. There's a lot of technology involved,
Right.
and there's options for a lot of jobs. Like just people think of a railroad as just a track of metal, but it's
Right.
it's complicated.
Right, yeah.
Yttrium, barium, copper oxide, and there's a brittleness. At least when I was studying it like 20 years ago, this was going to be the next thing.
Yeah.
There's a certain brittleness.
Yeah, but you just said it 20 years ago. So Maglev isn't really.
They have to overcome that brittleness, and then it has to be kept, I believe, at absolute zero. But whatever temperature that liquid nitrogen. But you know, you're talking about across the vast plains of the United States, you have to keep this liquid nitrogen.
Right.
You know, you don't just lay a track and go away. But people have to expand their idea. That's jobs, you know, maintenance.
Right. And advanced jobs too, not just jobs, you know, just being a dish. You know, there's construction, of course.
It's skilled labor, and you know, have someone in a truck just going, checking all the connections.
Right. There is a delicate balance that you need to maintain. So you need a highly skilled workforce to advance this.
I just, looking at this map, I thought you could also see it as a second wave of development of the countryside in the United States. Because once the country had been developed, then at a certain point, whole areas of the United States are being abandoned, from what I understand. There's areas in the rural Midwest that no longer have the populations that they had at one time for different reasons, economic reasons, I guess. And but if you put this type of a spur, just like in the original building of railroads throughout Europe or the United States, it could come as a developmental. You could develop new industries, could develop in new areas, new populations could be, promoted.
Right, absolutely.
In areas that are now being abandoned.
Yeah, areas, there's tons of vast space here. I mean, we can connect these areas now in short periods of time. You know, we were talking about what is the advantage? You know, what can we do with the speed? So if we can make these areas now inhabitable, you know, we can make, someone can commute from LA to, I don't know, Montana in a reasonable time.
Many more possibilities
Right.
geographically.
Right.
That's another point.
And this is how technology, you can always increase the population. There's no, this idea that there's a cap, there's too many people. You can access different areas of the world now more readily. So that option comes into play now. Technology is the only way to do that. You can't just sit down on your hands. You know, there was a point of time where the Pennsylvania Railroad was called the standard railroad of the world. It used to be the innovator. You know, the American railroads, no one can move freight like America can move freight. And that stalled, and now we're stuck in that kind of glut. And we need to take the next step. We need to take the leap. We need to make the leap, and it's going to cost money, and the way to do it is from the Fed. That's where we can get the credit, because it's going to take a lot of money to do this. It's going to be a big price tag, but we need to do it. We have to do it. There's no other option.
What is the news on the positive train control? Because that's gotten into the
Yeah. Currently, the Northeast Corridor is the only. I shouldn't say only. Northeast Corridor is the only, in the Northeast at least, or in the East, trackage with positive train control. This is a signal system. Amtrak 188, I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. That was that as well. That's the Metro North one. An engineer essentially overspeeding through the curve. There is no protections in all these systems really. All these trackers, there's no protection for an engineer if he somehow makes a mistake. I mean, if I make a mistake at work, most times I can kind of clean that up, or so we could somehow get around that. If an engineer makes a mistake, there's nothing backing him up. There's essentially, that's it. If you go too fast, you're going too fast, the train's going to derail. So what positive train control is, and it's an old technology, it's not something new. It's new here, but it's old in the rest of the world, is basically a way to provide another way to back up the engineer. So if he's going too fast, the system can say, all right, the train is supposed to go this fast at this point, and you're not doing that. It brings the train down to speed. And this is just, you would think this would be in every system. I mean, it's crazy that it's not. So you have Northeast Corridor just implemented this. Metrolink in Los Angeles has one of their lines is configured for positive train control. But it's been put off in the rest of the world. The railroad lobby successfully lobbied this year to not spend the money, to push it back another 5 to 7 years, depending on where they are and how far along they are. So we have, this is still going to be a problem. This is still something that could happen. And we talked about the cars being inferior. Also, the signal system is inferior. So we're dealing with a 19th century signal system where if the engineer just somehow has a moment, he could go off the tracks and we could have a really catastrophic disaster on our hands. And if you go into Europe, all these systems are in place. And if you want to have high-speed rail, you have to put these systems in place. You cannot have it. There's just no way for an engineer to use wayside signals, basically looking at a signal and saying, okay, I got to slow it down. It has to be built into the train, into the engine, because they're going so fast. You can't, there's just no way to react to the signal and react fast enough. So these things need to be in place. And unfortunately, it was deferred. And so when, we don't know, because before there was positive train control, there was electro-pneumatic braking on freights, which is basically you have electronic braking of freight trains. So you'll have, what you have now is an air pressure system. So the engineer applies the brakes and it slowly makes its way down the train. If you have a 100-car train, it's going to take a long time to get full application. So what the electro-pneumatic braking does is as soon as the engineer applies the brakes, it sends a signal. The signal is essentially like that through the whole train. It's all electronic. So all the brakes are applied basically at the same time. And you increase or decrease the amount of distance you require to stop the train. Now, this came up, I think, early 2000s. They successfully lobbied to stop this. And they said, too much money, we can't make, how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to do all these things? And I'm sorry, but this stuff needs to be in play. I mean, it's crazy. That the air brake system, the Westinghouse air brake system was designed in the late 1800s. That's the current braking system on most of the freight trains in the country. And it's just crazy. And maybe the answer is to have some kind of government way of pushing them. In the early 80s, you had Conrail, maybe late 70s, early 80s, you had what came about was Conrail. Essentially the federal government running a railroad. And what they did was they took over tracks in the Northeast that were abandoned or by Pennsylvania Railroad, New York Central, that could still be profitable. They took over those tracks. They ran a railroad. The government ran the railroad, and they ran it successfully. So if they tell you government can't do it, it's not true. They ran it so well that CSX, Norfolk Southern, they lobbied hard to say, you need to break this railroad up. We'll take the tracks. We'll run it now. You got it back up to good repair. You got it making money again. We'll take it over. You guys get out of the industry. And that's essentially what happened. So maybe they need a railroad that said, hey, we can do, we can put in a modern infrastructure and you can ship through us instead of using CSX and Norfolk Southern. And you guys need to catch up. And this is how you could do it. Have someone, the government providing the impetus to drive the free market, or whatever you want to call it, the private industry, to reach a certain level, a 21st century level of a railroad.
I have to say, all I was going to contribute is I see only one current presidential contender with any standing who would do, for example, use the Defense Production Act to seize some of this crackage for some of these operators and demonstrate a better way of doing this to the public. And that's Sanders. And so how
Has he ever said it?
Well, no, he didn't say it. I'm saying that he's the only one that I can even imagine, being open to
He's a large imagination.
even a demonstration.
Right.
So
I don't think any of this is even on their radar. I mean, if you look at, we had if you would think a crash in Washington D.C. would somehow hit home, right? I mean, for these people.
the media is the problem. The media suppresses all this. I mean, it's basically, it's controlled to the extent, I think, that they make news choices that exclude stories like this, and people are so distracted with them.
Right.
But I wonder if, are there authorities to seize some of this trackage?
Yes, the Defense Production Act, obviously, and remember in World War II, the whole rail system was seized and run by the government, all during World War II. I just wanted to ask you though, in Washington now, right, you mentioned this terrible crisis of the Washington subway.
Right, yeah, we talked about that yesterday. Yeah,
This is going on, right? There have been 15 incidents in the past couple of months. The whole system was shut down for one whole day.
Which is unheard of, really.
Which is unheard of, but I think it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean.
And this is because there is no dedicated source of funding. Right? You have the Virginia reactionaries, you have Maryland who does something, and then DC is chaotic. So they don't have any source of money. What they would need is a tax of some kind on Wall Street or something that would pay them. The federal government would simply come in and say, this is our workforce getting to work. The big conflict now is there are those who say that the metro should go under the Federal Railroad Administration, which they say has stronger oversight and stronger regulations, rather than the Federal Transit Administration. And I just wanted to point this out. Maybe you want to comment on it, but just so you're aware of it. Federal Railroad Administration, allegedly a stronger agency. Federal Transit Administration, not so strong. And they published this list of all the stretches of track that were going to be shut. And one of them was on the Red Line, so I live at the end of the Red Line, and that was going to be shut for a week or two. And then the Federal Transit Administration, to show how energetic they were, they said, no, those are the wrong priorities, you got to do these other places first, and now there's a compromise list. But
just a little bit further back, I mean, the metro system in the past decades had some of the worst mass transit accidents in history, maybe, on some level.
Well, I don't know. I mean, people get killed in the New York subway.
Well, a lot of suicides and things like that.
On the Red Line, right at Brookland, near Brookland Catholic University.
Two trains collided.
Two trains collided, and it was, what, 10, 12 people?
Yeah, but they've had, they had just this year, you've had a couple people, one person died of smoke inhalation.
A year ago, January.
Right. Now, the thing is with the metro is that it's designed to be operated automatically. But it hasn't been operated since that accident. And what happened was, yeah, the governors that are in the tracks that basically, they assign what trains are in this area, and they communicate with the computers of where, what trains are where. One of them had failed, and essentially a lot of them were failing, but it wasn't made known. And this allowed one train to collide with another train, and a bunch of people died from this. So, they had to. Since then, it's been all manual, and this is because the system's designed to be automatic. That's where the efficiency comes in. The proper speed, the proper spacing of trains, and the trains themselves aren't necessarily meant to be operated in manual mode for the full time. So, this has caused a lot of problems. The funding, obviously, a massive problem. There's a management issue, shortage of workforce, not enough people in the right area, not enough people in the control centers, things like this. Budget cuts that have limited the amount of people that could be in the control room, dispatching trains. So this has caused all kinds of problems, and it's essentially the closest system to collapse. I mean, it's as close as you can get right now. Now back to as far as who should govern it. I mean, I know the FR, like you said, the Railroad Administration went in and they came out with a report. I'd have to look into it more to see who's the better choice to control them. Yeah, I would say the Railroad Administration if I take a guess. That would be my guess. But I'd have to look into it more and see who would be less controlled by the railroad lobby, we'll say. Because I believe they're for positive train control. That's kind of how I guide it. You almost look at who is in favor of positive train control and who isn't. And if you're not, good chances are that the lobby's gotten to you. And if you are, then you're probably fighting for something that's worthwhile. You're still independent in some way. But look, that's a strong lobby. They were able to shut that down. And they weren't anywhere near it. They were nowhere near implementation. It would have been absolute chaos. I don't know what would have happened. I mean, you essentially would have made every railroad liable if there was an accident because of them not meeting that criteria at that point. What's up, Arthur?
You just gave me an idea. So I gather from what you said that there are people, individual agencies who favor positive train control and others, lobbies, operators, who oppose
Yeah, you want to look at like the American Association of Railroads. That's a real hardcore lobby. Take a look at their activities. Stay away from them. So anyway, I want to thank everybody. Oh, one last question. Yeah.
So is there a list of people who favor this? Because that might be, that it might be worth reaching out to them, saying, we're the Tax Wall Street Party.
Right.
We want national lending for infrastructure building and improvement.
Yeah.
And here's our program.
Yeah, Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers. That's certainly in their realm. The FRA, they're involved in that. So.
It's a federal project, right? It's not for states to take up on their own.
No, it's federal. Yeah. I mean, they are doing it. Like if you look at Long Island Railroad, they have their own implementation of positive train control. So I wouldn't say it's all federal, but you have states involved doing it on their own as well to meet this. But the mandate is federal. Yeah.
Maglev would be federal.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. Or it could be state. I mean, the states can go to the Fed and say, hey, we want to build a Maglev in California, and we need this money, and issue it, buy our bonds, and we'll do it.
Actually, the Indian state is doing this, the Shatabdi trains, I guess. They built an express line down the western hills that the British couldn't do, so they're still doing it. I think the Port Authority also, because they've got their rolling federal, because I guess they have a double industry on their World Trade Center towers, so to speak. But the path system runs, it's completely automatic. As far as I know.
No, it's actually manual.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's actually motoring.
I mean, there's a crew on each train,
Right.
but it seems to be, they're dispatched pretty much automatically.
No, still manual.
Okay.
Very few that are actually automatic.
So next time.
Yeah, just one more question and we'll.
Yeah, apologies if you've already covered this,
Okay.
because obviously I'm late.
No, that's fine.
Actually, got one here looking for Alexander Hamilton, but.
That's what this is, it's gonna start in just a minute.
Oh, I see. Well, anyway, this is more interesting. Anyway, has this issue of like taxing Wall Street to fund mass transit and rail lines, et cetera, has anyone in any of the presidential campaigns come up with, showed any interest in this sort of thing at all? And failing that, is there any bill in Congress, no matter how long shot it is, that embodies this?
Yeah, I mean, you'll hear Sanders talk about a tax on Wall Street, but it's no definitive, it's no, for education, but not for this kind of
And
infrastructure.
he never explains it. He never says anything more than just the bare bones. He says the tax, how much, percentage, how
And, yeah,
collected.
if any mention it, there's no mention of a percentage, what they actually want to do. Yeah, it's quickly, it's not on Sanders' points. If Hillary wins and you want the Sanders voter, it's not on that fact sheet.
He has the carbon tax.
Yeah, but not the Wall Street sales tax. So we got to get out there and demand this, fight for this stuff.